What should officer be, a guardian or a warrior? And the debate shouldn't necessarily be around should it be either a guardian or a warrior. It should be how do we incorporate all of those concepts? And what we know is that the spectrum of duties that we're called to do, on one side of the spectrum, it is high-risk calls, things that we kind of traditionally think about cop work. And on the other end of the spectrum is completely social service stuff. It is caretaking of the community. And the majority of our calls lean more towards the caretaking piece of our police department. And if you go back in time and look how we recruit, we're recruiting for that high-risk officer. And that's 5% or less of our job. Everything else, the other 95%, is what we do every single day. And our ideal officer is the officer that does those 95% very, very well, not that does the 5% very well.
Welcome to the East Anchorage Book Club. I'm your host, Andrew Gray. The purpose of this podcast is to tell the stories of Alaskans of interest and importance. Today, our guest is the chief of the Anchorage Police Department, Sean Case. As a 7th grader at Hanshew Middle School here in Anchorage, he decided he wanted to be a police officer. He got his bachelor's degree in justice at UAA, and at age 20, Alaska wouldn't hire him because he was too young. So he got his first job in law enforcement with the Los Angeles Police Department. But after just a couple years there, he came back to Anchorage and has been with APD ever since. Sean Case was appointed chief of police in 2024 by Anchorage Mayor Suzanne LaFrance. Chief Sean Case, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Where'd you grow up?
So I grew up in a small town called Mandan, North Dakota, which is right outside the capital, Bismarck, until I was in the 4th grade. That's when I moved to Alaska. So I am from a smaller Midwest community within North Dakota. Flat, windy, cold. My mom's family, 13 brothers and sisters, very large family. So I'm used to like very loud, obnoxious family gatherings, getting together in the basement of the church is where, everyone in those small communities gather. Grew up, I would say, relatively poor. I mean, my mom's line that she always used to use with us is, "We're rich in love, son." Grew up on government assistance when we were living in North Dakota. I was raised by my mom and my sister.
Your dad wasn't really present?
No. My mom and dad were divorced when I was 1. Never lived with my father. My sister's 5 years older than me, so my mother and sister primarily raised me, which that's a unique experience, being the baby of the family and having a sister you think I'm in the 6th grade, she's junior in high school. She had a good hand in raising me. And my mom worked many jobs and put herself through school, and she covers the entire spectrum. Now, on the one end, my mom is the hardest working, tough as nails, more grit than probably anyone I know, can do anything. And on the other end of the spectrum, my mom is the most loving, sensitive person that I've also ever met. And, she had very little tolerance as I was growing up of not putting forth 100% effort all the time. But she's an amazing individual. She volunteers all the time. One of the volunteers things that she does up here, she's now recently moved back to North Dakota about a little over a year ago. But she was a part of a group called the Listening Group. And so one of the things that she'd volunteer, she'd go down to Brother Francis and she'd sit on the bench down there and she would just visit with homeless people and talk to homeless people. She volunteered at Providence Hospital for people that were dying. She'd be on a call-out list, and she'd go in the middle of the night for people that didn't have family or friends and they were about to die. She would race to Providence Hospital, so she would sit with them and hold their hand while they died. So both of them have just a tremendous influence on my life and how I kind of view the world, and I owe both of them everything good. I generally say it's because of my mother and sister. So my sister still lives here too. So
why did your mom move you guys to Alaska?
She remarried. That didn't end up working out in the long run, which is why, again, I always claim that my mother and sister are the ones that raised me and are kind of responsible for the good that came out of me. But yeah, she remarried. So that's what.
And he wanted to move you guys to Alaska, or he was from Alaska?
He lived in Alaska. He's from North Dakota. They reconnected and then eventually got married. And so we drove the Alcan in the summer between my 3rd and 4th grade year. And I've been in Alaska ever since, with the exception when I went to LA for my first police job.
So what year did you move to Alaska?
1987, May of 1987.
How old are you?
I'm 48.
48. And where in Alaska did you guys settle?
So we grew up in Lower Ocean View, like real close to Ocean View Elementary. That was my elementary school, which was also very, very interesting because prior to that, living very, very poor. Then we went to a part of Anchorage that it's a lower hillside. You're going to school with the folks that have a pretty decent life. My life definitely stepped up when my mom remarried. And so, I can still remember like the first trip to Costco and you could buy, and I remember it was Three Musketeers. I was like, how you can buy a whole box? Like I'd never seen a box of Three Musketeers ever that a person could purchase, right? It's just a different way of life, different, I thought we were rich when we had a little bit more money. And then you go to school, there's no South back then. And so, Service was a very wealthy school. And so I went from being very poor to like lower middle class and going to school with like upper class. And that was just an interesting experience.
Did they stay married all the way through your high school years?
Yeah, into high school is when they ended up separating. Yeah.
When your mom's second marriage didn't work out when you were in high school, I mean, was that a difficult time or not that big of a deal or?
No, it wasn't a very big of a deal because, again, my relationship and my upbringing and who influenced me was all my mom and my sister. It was a bigger deal for me when my sister left state to go to college than it was my mom separating and then eventually divorcing her husband because he didn't really have much impact on me or influence on me. It really was my mom.
And you have no relationship with your birth dad's family?
I have some relationship with my birth father. He came up here, he came up the summer. He stays with my sister for a couple of weeks. I went out to dinner with him and a bunch of other people while he was here for 2 weeks, and that's it. So I saw him one time for, an hour or 2 hours. We're different people with different paths. And I don't hold any ill will or anything towards my father. I don't, it's just that he wasn't a huge influence and impact on my life. And so when you take a path and you go to school and you get out, you get a job, and now, I'm 48 years old and chief of police, he didn't go on that journey like a normal parent would. And so for me, I don't think it impacts me or influences me that much. It's just, we're not strangers, but we don't have a lot to talk about.
How long have you and your wife been together?
We are in year number 6 of being married. And so we've been together for 8 years, about 8 years.
Do you feel like having grown up in a single parent household predominantly that affects the way you think about marriage? And
it does. It definitely does. It also really kind of has had me focus on the relationship between parent and children and how much of an influence that is. I also look at my sister and her relationship with my dad and me and my relationship with my mom, and really have had an understanding at a very young age that moms and sons and dads and daughters have a unique relationship. And so I've really tried to kind of tailor my parenting because of that experience. And so my relationship with my daughter has been very intentional, and
you just have one?
I have one daughter and one son.
One daughter and one son.
So my daughter's 18. She just graduated from high school. And, I never ever call my daughter princess. I've always called her queen. Because I've told her from a very young age, princesses don't get to make any decisions. We tell you what to do, and you do what we tell you to do. You just get to wear a nice little crown, and that's not who you are. You are a queen, and you are going to make your own decisions, and you are going to take control of your life, and you are going to be a leader. And establishing that relationship with my daughter at a very young age, because I want her to do things like I'm doing. I want her to be the chief of whatever her organization is, whatever her career field is.
And your son, how old's your son?
My son's 20. He does heat and air conditioning stuff in Idaho. When he graduated from high school, he hopped on a plane and decided he wanted to figure things out, which I love. And he is. Sometimes as a parent, it's scary to watch your kid do that because you watch him smash into walls trying to figure it out. And you're like, I can help. And he's like, don't want anyone's help, want to figure it out. So I respect that.
And you graduated from service?
Graduated from service.
95?
Yes.
Did you know at that time that you wanted to go into law enforcement?
7th grade was when I knew that's what I wanted to do.
What happened in seventh grade that made you think you wanted to do that?
We had some project that we had to do. To be honest, I don't remember the details, but I remember there's some project we had to do that had something to do with, what do you want to be when you grow up, essentially. And I'm a seventh grade dumb boy, and the thing that attracted me to law enforcement is you get to go out and do some pretty cool things. Drive a police car, you get to drive fast, you get to lights and sirens. It's all the, TV show stuff of law enforcement that attracted me to the job from a young age.
Well, I think a lot of 12-year-olds might think about that, but most of them don't stick with it. Was there anything else that happened later that said, well, yeah, I really do want to be a policeman?
There wasn't a kind of a defining moment that I had like this story that just really connected me to law enforcement. I think once that decision was made in my mind, it kind of was always there throughout the rest of high school as well as college. And my undergraduate is from UAA, so I was in the justice program. And for those people who don't understand the history of that program, when I went, it was a justice program. It wasn't a criminal justice program. It wasn't a criminology program. And so that in and of itself is a different perspective on that programming. And I remember taking a class from one professor where we spent an entire class period trying to really focus on what justice was. And so there was a very, very big emphasis on the UA program at the time, and I'm sure it's still there today, about where's the justice in the criminal justice system and what does that mean and how can it impact various different fields. And from that moment on, I can tell you that there was definitely a focus in my mind that there was some level of justice in law enforcement that we bring to a community. And that started to kind of be the attraction to the field of you're out there, you're doing this work, you're having contact with various different people. And the victims was that first phase of we were really trying to bring justice to victims. And it carries all the way to today. I'm on the board for a victim advocate agency, so I've kind of just kept that thread throughout my entire career. And in the early days of law enforcement, it was all about you make the arrest, you put the person in jail to bring justice to the victim. A very simplistic view of law enforcement. It's gotten a lot more complex as I move through and get more education and have more experiences. But I look at the education that I got at UAA and how it shaped why I wanted to do this and what kind of impact I wanted to have.
Did you have to go to college to become a police officer?
No, I didn't. But I didn't know what I was going to do after high school because at the time, most places you have to be 21 to apply. The state of California, you can be 20 and a half to apply, which is why I ended up applying down there. I graduated in 6 months before I turned 21, so I had to do something with my time. So I started applying, and Los Angeles picked me up.
Were you excited about moving to Los Angeles? It's a notorious police department.
Yeah. So I had a professor at UA that was a LA County Sheriff's, retired as a supervisor, as a sergeant. He supervised a gang unit in South Central Los Angeles, and he had to medically retire because he was in a foot pursuit and ran around a corner, and guy was waiting for him on the other side and took a 2x4 to his knee and smashed him in the knee. He couldn't recover from it, so he medically retired. But he was a professor at UA. Lenny Trossel was his name. And he used to tell me, if the world was a tuxedo, the LAPD would be a pair of old sneakers. And he always used to go, why do you want to go down there and work? But that just kind of sums me up. I was like, really? LAPD is a pair of old sneakers, huh? I'm going to go check that out. And so I got on a plane when I started the hiring process, because they do an out-of-state process where they bring you down there for a week to go through a bunch of the steps. Never been to LA before in my life. And have an uncle that lives outside of LA that had to go help me rent a car because I was too young. And then I said goodbye to him, and I hopped in this rental car with a map on my lap and figured out how to navigate around LA to get me where I needed to go. I spent all the evenings that week just driving the freeways around LA just to kind of become familiar with it. I was very excited. It was a new and fun experience. Notorious police department. You are right about that. Very large police department.
And I guess what year are we talking?
98.
98.
Yep. There was still a heavy, heavy influence on LAPD training for Rodney King.
Yeah.
Still talked about regularly.
5 or 6 years after Rodney King.
Yep. And while I was down there, some people remember the Rampart incident and the scandal that took place in Rampart, which is a division of LAPD. So I was down there during that time.
What was that scandal?
So there were gang units within the Los Angeles Police Department, and they were called crash units. which stood for Community Resources and Street Hoodlums, was what the crash stood for. Okay. And you chuckle because you're like, well, I can see how maybe that didn't go well. All bad things start with a bad name. And so each division had a crash unit, and Rampart is the smallest geographical area at the time of the Los Angeles Police Department. It is primarily large apartment complexes. It's built up. And the dominant culture is Spanish-speaking, predominantly from Mexico in Rampart. And a lot of street carts, a lot of street vendors, a lot of crime, a lot of homicides, a lot of street gangs. And so the crash team ended up veering quite off course to start doing illegal activities like, I'm going to catch you with drugs. I'm now going to take your drugs. I'm going to sell drugs. So there were a lot of crimes they were committing, and crash got disbanded. Officers were prosecuted. The division that I was in had a sergeant and a crash member from Rampart come to our division and then weeks later disappear and never come back. So it was a pretty significant event in the Los Angeles area as well as throughout the police department.
What part of LA were you a police officer in?
I did my probation in San Fernando Valley, Devonshire Division. And then once I finished my probation, which you're on probation for a year, I went to West Los Angeles.
Like UCLA area?
UCLA was in our area. They have their own police department, but Westwood Village was LAPD territory. So if you're familiar with UCLA and the Village, yeah.
How many years were you there?
I was there October 98 to December of 2000.
And were you always looking for a path back to Alaska, or
Yes. Original plan was 5 years and then come back home. But once you get down there, first of all, I love my time down there, but you start working with people that have a little bit of time on, and like, why are you going to invest in your retirement for 5 years when you know you're going to turn around and go back home? You may as well go back home now.
and invest in your retirement there?
That's right. And you never think about that when you have the original plans, because what 20-year-old kids thinking about retirement? So yeah, I came back early. Been here ever since.
So you came back to Anchorage in 2000?
December 2000. Yep.
Well, tell us about your first few days working for the Anchorage Police Department.
So I had a little bit of a unique experience. There were 8 or 9 laterals that were in my kind of academy that started when a regular academy. So we spent some time in the academy. We went to field training. We'd come back to the academy for a class. We kind of went back and forth throughout the academy. So we were getting trained in the academy and trained in FTO at the same time, which we don't do that anymore. And I think my academy was the only one that did that.
So that's interesting. And I guess it's like my own lack of understanding. So if you go from LAPD to Anchorage PD, are you treated as if you're a brand new police officer and you go through APD Police Academy with folks who've never been police officers before?
Today we do that. Yes. I have 3 people in the academy right now that are fully tenured, out of state, fully commissioned officers, and they started the academy start to finish.
The lateral means that people who were
Yes.
police officers somewhere else. Got it.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And I think we had 8 laterals, out of state laterals in my academy, because the department was trying to create this shortened academy. So you kind of had a fast track to get out on the street and start working, which is why we had such a high number in my group that was from out of state.
And what was your first job, once you got out of the academy?
Patrol. When I finished field training, I immediately went to mid-shift patrol, which at the time was 11 p.m. to 9 in the morning. That's where I started out my patrol time. And I got bounced around because of seniority, but eventually went back to mids as kind of my home.
And do you have any stories from that particular period of your career?
I think the thing that was just interesting to me was LAPD is a very controlled environment. The use of force policies, the internal affairs policies, the training is very, very consistent amongst the 9,500 cops that they had down there at the time. And Anchorage was significantly different, a little bit more open. You had a lot of different paths you could take to do your job, whereas LAPD, everyone was kind of doing everything the exact same way. And so I remember that I was actually out in Eagle River at the time on mid-shift patrol, and somebody ran. I ended up tackling them. We were on a dirt parking lot, and they ended up getting skinned up because I tackled them. And I called up my sergeant at the time, and I was like, hey, I just arrested this person. Here's what happened. And then I got into this use of force, and the sergeant was like, why are you calling me? And I was like, I'm not in LA anymore.
Because in LA, you would have had to call and get
Oh,
report.
and they would have come to the scene and everything would have stopped and the investigation would have started right there. And that wasn't our culture. That wasn't our training. That wasn't our policies at the time. And so it was just a different way of doing business. But on the other end of the spectrum, I also policed all the ways I did in LA when I came to here, and definitely a lot more aggressive policing. In LA, that's how I was trained. It was putting handcuffs on the bad guy. That was the goal every day. And so on the flip side, what I noticed here is that the officers were so much more tolerant and so much more methodical in their work. They cared about like the long term of their work. Like in LA, you didn't care if they were walking out the back door when you booked them into jail and you weren't even done your plea. You didn't care. You made the arrest, you put them in jail, you walked out the door. If it was prosecuted or not, you didn't care. It was kind of all about the arrest. Here, officers follow their cases all the way through. They know if it's being dropped by the prosecutor, the DA. There's just a lot more focus on the kind of the totality of the job. And so, for me, I was lucky enough to have a couple supervisors that had contact with me when I got here to pull me aside and go, hey, appreciate your style, appreciate the motivation, but we don't do it that way here. And I had to really change kind of the way I did police work. And I wouldn't have been able to do that had I not had a couple supervisors that were patient with me because they believed I was trying to do the right thing. I was just taught differently. And we see that frequently. It's one of the main reasons why we have our recruits from out of state who are police officers go through the full academy is to really indoctrinate them into the way we do business. Because there's only two, me and one other officer that was in my academy that are still here that survived. The rest of the laterals are all gone. And it was because they just couldn't
Adopt to the culture. I did some crowdsourcing of questions to ask you. And I think just listening to you talk about the difference between LA and here, a couple of people were like, my question for APD is, why don't you arrest more people? Can you speak a little about that?
Yeah, it's actually frustrating for me as the chief because when things happen along the way that are outside of our control, it impacts the morale of the agency. Where we're at in terms of arresting people, we got here for a series of events that have happened. First of all, SB 91, things happened within the state that caused things to break for a minute.
10 years ago was a long time ago. Yeah. SB 91 there was a kind of an overall feeling that we were locking too many people up, that we needed to change the way our whole criminal justice system functioned, and was going to be a more rehabilitative approach as opposed to a punishment approach, was how I would paraphrase it.
That's a great paraphrase. So a lot of unintended consequences. One of the things that the public doesn't generally know is there's a thing called a bail schedule. And so an officer, when they make an arrest, they have to take the person before a magistrate to get bail set, or that crime can be covered on what's called a bail schedule, which means we don't have to go to a magistrate because the 4 presiding judges for each judicial district within Alaska has decided that these crimes, the officer can just go to this piece of paper and it will tell the officer, oh, this is an OR release. This is a note they have to go to jail, and this is what their bail is. It even tells the officer what conditions are released to check on the boxes. So it just is a fast track. When SB 91 was happening, that bail schedule kind of went away for a period of time and didn't really exist because the laws were changing and in flux. And so it took a while for the presiding judges to get that bail schedule fixed. And so what happened is you had several months where the officers kind of raised their hands and like, I don't know what to do. Like, there's no answer. We are not getting it legislatively yet. We're not getting it judicially yet. And now we're looking at the department to give us a policy change, and the department's going, we're with you. We don't know what to do. And so when something like that breaks down, you have a generation of cops that are trained to start doing things differently. And a lack of prosecutors and DAs that we went through post-COVID means cases weren't getting prosecuted. Also has the impact on, like, are we arresting people or are we doing something else? And why are we not arresting enough people? Trespass and how that law, I mean, that's just one example. Trespass is a law that people really want enforced. It wasn't getting prosecuted for a significant amount of time. And the way the law was being interpreted for the police department was very narrow. So we couldn't use that law as broadly as we're using it now. And so you have years of officers being trained in a certain way. And literally when I go back to them today and I'm like, we're going to turn the spigot on, we're going to make more arrests, they're going to be prosecuted, and we're going to be more liberal in our interpretation of that particular law and others. These officers that we have here look at me and they go, I'm uncomfortable with that. It's not the way I was trained. That's not the way I've been doing it before. It doesn't feel appropriate for me to do it this new way. And so it's not just as easy as saying, hey, do it this way and move on. You got to retrain them. You got to educate them why we're doing it. You got to give them the new interpretation and why there's a new interpretation. They got to feel comfortable that they're doing the right thing. And I think that's also one of the kind of the elements of APD officers that we have that's unique is they really want to do the right thing. And we know that because when we try to change a policy, like they want to know. Feels like this may be different and it may not be the right way.
I guess speaking generally, what do you think is the most difficult thing about being a police officer?
I think right now for officers, it's different from when I was on the street. Right now with social media, the access to information, videos that's available out there, the most challenging thing is officers don't want to make a mistake and get caught making a mistake, and now it's a social media post. I've asked officers for over 15 years of teaching, both in Alaska, out of Alaska, different ranks. I always ask them what their greatest fear of work is. And that has changed over the last 5 years. And that influence primarily is because there are so many eyes on everything they're doing. And it's not Alaska law enforcement specific that's forming the opinions about the Anchorage Police Department. In many cases, it's something that happens on the other side of the country that now impacts what the opinion or thought or view is of an Anchorage police officer. And so now the officers have to deal with something that is related to them because we're all one big happy law enforcement family. We can't disassociate, but APD didn't make a decision. They weren't involved in an event that was a catalyst event. And that wears pretty significantly on officers. I have seasoned officers that I've had conversations with that cannot wait to get to their retirement day, that say, like, I've dedicated my entire life and I would never recommend to my family or friends to get into law enforcement because I feel like I got in for the right reason. And here I am at the end of my career and it feels like the public support has gone away. And so for the street level officer, I think that's the biggest challenge and biggest threat, to them in their daily life.
So I can see how everyone carrying around a cell phone where they can do a video on the spur of the moment, that's different than it was 20 years ago. And then being able to post it on social media and have it be shared 1,000 times. I guess thinking about that and body-worn cameras has been such a hot button issue for a few years in Anchorage. You just speak about the use of body-worn cameras and how that plays a role in the morale of your officers.
So when body-worn cameras were getting ready to be rolled out, I was a little bit surprised that the employees, by and large, were very excited about having them. First of all, they've grown up in the generation where they're around cameras, and their belief generally is that the body-worn cameras are going to show them doing good work. And so there wasn't a lot of pushback within APD when we started wearing body-worn cameras. That's not the case for many departments. Many departments go through a very, very challenging internal process to get these things up and rolling. Officers forget to turn on their cameras, in air quotes, right? Like they forget to turn them on or they're turned off accidentally, and we didn't have that type of an issue. Now, what I can say is that body-worn cameras certainly changed the way we do business because we know that all of our calls for service, all of our contacts with the public can now be reviewed, and they can be reviewed by certainly supervisors and command staff. Some of these videos we clearly release to the public when they're officer-involved shooting videos, and there's other mechanisms these videos can be, and you can do a records request for these videos, and so long as it's not an active case, like the videos are going to be redacted, and then you're going to have access to them. And so the way we interact with the public, it has changed, and some of it probably for the good, but some of it are challenges for officers and challenges. I mean, when you think about officers investigating certain types of crime, And we're in scenarios and we're talking to people that live a different life than you and I do. They're living a life that they've had challenges and struggles, and there's drugs, there's alcohol, both of them probably happening at the same time. There's violence. There's all these factors. And when we go in and talk to them, their communication style is not the same communication style that you and I are going to have. And so officers develop a communication style in the street to effectively communicate with people that are living in that type of world. And that communication style has had to change because the average public, when they hear that old communication style, they say, no, we don't want our officers speaking like that or talking to a person that way. And there's pros and cons to that. The pros is that we have more professional language that happens within the police department. The challenge is that, and this is hard for some people to understand, but there's some relatability that officers have with people when they're talking to them, when they can communicate more effectively or similarly to what they're used to communicating with. And I think you have to see it to believe it. It's kind of like the people that want to talk about homelessness generally, but yet they're not with the homeless population. So they don't actually know like what's happening with the homeless population. They see it from afar. And the same thing goes. I mean, imagine interviewing a sexual assault suspect or sexual assault to a minor suspect. The general public doesn't think about that interaction in a detective having a conversation with somebody that sexually assaulted an 8-year-old. It's a very different conversation, a way of communicating to try to make a case and get a confession to get justice for an 8-year-old victim. But now all that stuff, not the detective interviews, but in patrol environment, that's all potentially open to the public, depending on when they get access to that.
Well, in that same vein of talking about body-worn cameras, there's been a lot of talk about the additional cameras and AI technology being used, like license plates and streets and sort of some people thinking of it as like a Minority Report, Brave New World, where you guys have cameras everywhere and identify vehicles all over the city. And there's some concerns raised about that.
Yeah, I think this is 2025 and we are well behind the rest of the country and major cities. And when we think of Anchorage and us being a little bit under 300,000, we don't think of ourselves as a major city. We're a major city. We have everything in Anchorage that happens in very, very large cities. We have no suburbs. It all happens here in Anchorage. We are the hub city for the entire state. And so we have all the problems. License plate readers are 20 years old. This technology is not new. It's, it's been adapted a little bit, but by and large, license plate reader technology is very, very similar to what it was 15, 16 years ago. And we're just now getting the ability to have that type of technology. Now, some of our technology that we're getting is we are jumping ahead of the rest of the market. When you talk about drones as first responders, we're going to be one of 100 police departments in the country to have drones as first responders. So we're catching up in some ways, but in some ways we are really catapulting ourselves to the next level. And traditionally our response when there's a public safety issue is we just have to throw more people, more human beings at the problem. And right now, again, with the availability of technology, information to be passed around, the demand on the police department and what we do, we'll have no more people left. We have to have technological assistance to do all the things that the public is demanding us to do. And there's also a huge safety element that technology brings to us. So drones as first responders, when I can have a drone over a scene that's happening outside that's involving a gun or a knife or a weapon, and a drone can be there in 40 seconds to 60 seconds, long before an officer, and tell the officers, okay, the person with the gun is definitively this person, this description, wearing these clothes, and you're coming into the area, they just took off running. This is where they are. This is where they're hiding. Okay, set up the perimeter versus officers having to charge in, and just the risk of getting involved in an officer-involved shooting is significantly higher. So there's a safety issue. There's an increase in staffing power that we have. So we're exponentially using the staffing that we have. Collection evidence, the ability to do that is significantly increased. And what we have to do is we have to be responsible how we use technology. Our technology policies that we have, and we've introduced all 3 of the policies already. We're going over them one by one. We did one already at the Public Health and Safety Committee, meeting with the assembly members. and we'll do the next two in November and December. Very restrictive policies. We collect our data and keep it for 14 days. The most restrictive policies in the country with the most restrictive laws in the country are a year on retaining data. We're doing 14 days. That means serious crimes. We have the inability to use that evidence that's collected outside of 14 days. And we do that because we understand that we're introducing a lot of technology all at one time. I don't care what your political lean is in Alaska. We all have a little streak of libertarianism in us. We all don't like the government hovering over us. And we understand that. We respect that. I was mostly raised here. I'm with you on all of that. And we love our right to privacy. It is specifically stated in our Constitution. And we're going to lean towards protecting the right to privacy over open government access to stuff every day of the week. And if that means we lose some information, that means we're going to err on that side. Now, where we are in 5 years, don't know. But the public is going to walk with us on this journey. And we're not going to open that up without the public's input and without the public's consent, really.
Well, back to body-worn cameras. My experience is mostly with watching what happened with Easterly Alpha, the 16-year-old who was shot in my district. And I've watched the video a lot. And I guess I appreciate that APD put that video out. You can see what happened as it happened. But I can't not talk about use of force from our police department with a 16-year-old female, and I guess how things have changed in the last year, if you could speak about that.
Sure. When we have a significant use of force or use of force in general, but all the way up to an officer level use of deadly force, we look at policy. We look at it from a policy standpoint. We look at it from a criminal standpoint, which is great. But those are the two perspectives we look at. Many agencies across the country have added the training element in there as well. So once the criminal case is all gone, we not only look at policy, but they look at training. Did you follow training? Did you follow tactics? And did the officer make an error leading up to the shooting that could have potentially prevented that? One of the things that the Anchorage Police Department hasn't done ever until now, we've never touched that in our administrative investigation. Certainly we've never disciplined an employee for it. And other agencies, LAPD, for example, has been doing this for quite a number of years. And without that element, without that level of review, without looking at an officer and said, hey, we trained you to do A, you did D, and then it resulted in somebody dying, and we're going to discipline you for it. It's not criminal. The mistake may not be to the level we're going to terminate him for it even. Maybe it is. But without being able to do that, you have a real difficult time changing behavior, ensuring that your employees are following not just the policy, but the training and the tactics that we give them. It also, remember earlier when I talked about we had a lot more kind of wide breadth of what we could do when I came up here from LA, we're also kind of narrowing that back down. We don't want our officers all over the map on how they respond, particularly to tactical situations or high-risk situations. We want to be very consistent and very limited so that all of our officers are using the same tactics at the same time, and we don't have unexpected or unintended consequences. And so we've added that element in the last year. Not super popular, as you can imagine, if you're an employee, that new element is added because it's extra pressure and scrutiny and increased risk of discipline. But we've added that element. We've also added just a whole host of training. We've had 3 different de-escalation trainings that we've gone through as an agency over the course of the last year. Training not just our patrol officers, but also all the way up to me. I've gone through some of the de-escalation training as well. So we've added that. We've added elements of if we've increased their knowledge and the expectation on de-escalation, then we also have to increase the ability that our officers can provide self-care and self-management. So you can't expect an officer to be perfect in de-escalation, going from call to call to call, high-risk call to low-risk call to moderate, and they're going to perform flawlessly. We have to make sure that we train them in emotional intelligence, where they recognize that they're a little bit too amped up to go to the next call. We've got 2 sensory rooms at 2 different buildings within the police department that officers can go to and help de-escalate themselves so that they're ready to go to the next call. Some of the tools that we've added, some of the less lethal tools that is going to increase the confidence in using them as officers. One of those tools is going to be here next week. And also reduce the likelihood that we're going to have officer-involved shootings because the officers are going to be more confident in the tool, and the tool is more effective than it was.
What's the tool that's coming next week?
The new Taser 10. So Taser 10 allows a much longer deployment, and the effective rate is much higher than what we currently have with our Tasers. So we run about a 20% effective rate for our current Tasers. So 20% when somebody's got a high-risk tool that you're facing, a bat, a knife, officers are a little hesitant to use a tool that's only going to be effective 20% of the time. The new Taser 10 is much more effective at a much longer distance. So officers can get behind cover and concealment to deploy the tool and be confident that it's going to work. We've also added a projectile that officers can shoot that has like a pepper spray, it's powder, that hits a little bit harder, that's a little more effective. In Alaska, the tool that we had right now was like a foam. So, you have winter clothes on here and it's very ineffective. And so we got a little bit harder. It's not a bone breaking, it's not that hard hitting, but it's a little bit harder hitting so that it's going to increase the level of compliance that we're going to get without having to go to something that is going to cause more damage. So we've added that tool as well this month. We've added those things. But I think generally speaking, just across the board, the culture that we're trying to instill with the officers is, and one of the ways we're doing this is we're doing scenarios based on all the officer-involved shootings that we had in the last 24 months. And the idea is we got to go into these scenarios and the officers have to think how we prevent shooting. And to some people who hear this, they'll be like, well, no kidding. You haven't been doing that all along? No, law enforcement generally doesn't teach that way. Law enforcement generally teaches, hey, you're going to go in. If certain requirements are met, for instance, you are having to defend yourself or somebody else from serious physical injury or death, you're allowed to use deadly force. And yeah, we have tactics and training and the way we stand and cover that reduces the risk of an officer-involved shooting. For sure, that's always been in our training. But to approach it from the standpoint of how do we prevent a shooting from happening? What are the steps that we can do, still keep ourselves safe, but prevent a shooting from happening? And that goes back to, again, drones, first responders are a piece of that. Supervisors having immediate control of scenes, making sure we have enough officers that are responding, making sure they're equipped with the right equipment. If this is a call where we need a mobile intervention team, making sure they're en route to the call, making sure the officers don't charge in, slow things down. Those are all elements that we've added to training and really highlighted in training in the last year. Our officers have gone through, I believe, 6 scenarios that are all officer-involved shooting-related scenarios just this year alone, which is more than we've ever done before. And we'll continue that into 2026. So if we add all 20 or 30 of these things that we're doing up, we know that we're reducing the likelihood of officer-involved shootings. That doesn't mean that we're not going to have one today, right? That doesn't mean an officer can encounter a conduct or behavior with an individual that they have to defend themselves or somebody else. But we certainly are going to have the training. We're going to have the tools, the tactics to make sure that we reduce that likelihood as much as we can.
I hear everything you're saying, and I have to just admit that I hear it through the context of a 16-year-old female who didn't speak English. And it was like a 2-minute interaction. I mean, I hope you do it differently. When I did my ride-along last year, I talked about vacancy rates with the officer who was doing the ride-along with me. And one of the things he mentioned was that there's so much vacancy that you could do a lot of overtime and that you could work every day if you wanted to. And he made sort of a little offhand comment of something like, and there are guys who do that. And they're pretty crusty. And so I thought about that when you were talking about de-escalation and folks being amped up, that, when you have folks who are working every day because there's available shifts. Can you speak a little bit about that and about vacancies and about how that affects your mission?
Yeah. One interesting thing about the vacancies and overtime is we don't have the number of officers to take advantage of the overtime details or call in overtime like they used to. We can't fill all of our overtime details or shifts that we need to today. So those number of officers, you go back 20 years ago, if there was an overtime opportunity, it was filled. And that just is like work culture. It's not just the police department. It's what we see in our work culture right now. People want their time off.
How many officers were there in APD when you started versus now?
When I started, we were about 350 that we were authorized. And right now we're authorized for right around 425-ish.
Okay. So modest growth.
Yeah.
I'd say. Yeah.
And it is significantly impactful on our workforce when they don't get their annual leave, they don't get their time off, they don't get their rest, and they're getting called in to work overtime. Because, this job wears on you a little bit. And when you combine that with, again, just the work culture that we have, just kind of globally, people want that work-life balance. And to most employees, work-life balance means I need to get my time off and rest and kind of recharge. And so a lot of the things that we would love to do within the department, it's challenging to do because the way we accomplish it is we do a overtime detail and we throw money at it and we bring people who've already worked 40 or 50 hours a week. And so we have to be really kind of mindful of that when we try to create like, hey, what's the response to this problem? Yes, we can throw money at it, we can put officers at it, but it also has unintended consequences downstream. And luckily, our officers are pretty open up front about it. Of like, hey, we're getting smoked, we're getting burned out, we're getting tired. And the good news is we got a full academy. Looks like we're trending towards a full academy in December as well. So we can see the light at the end of the tunnel. This is going to get better. We've had more operational help from our non-sworn or professional staff with our CSOs. Just adding 19 new positions for them. So that takes some of the stress off of the sworn officers because they can handle a portion of their job. So we're doing some things to try to help that problem, but it definitely impacts the ability to accomplish our mission when you're not properly staffed. And even when we are, we're not at the numbers that this community needs.
Is there a magic solution to having all the officers that we need?
No, we went through about a 5-year time period where we could only fill the academies about 50% capacity. We just weren't getting job applications, and we changed the way we recruited. We kind of did a pretty significant campaign of what the police department looks like, what type of a person we're looking for. If we back up 3 years ago and you asked the chief or you asked the recruiting sergeant at the time, what's our ideal officer? They would say, I don't know. We have an ideal officer that we want right now.
What's our ideal officer now?
I talk about policing on a spectrum. I talk about it all the time. People probably get sick of hearing me talk about it. And when I have a diagram that I show that has an officer that's kind of split in half, this guardian versus warrior, and that's a big debate. What should officer be, a guardian or a warrior? And the debate shouldn't necessarily be around should it be either a guardian or a warrior. It should be how do we incorporate all of those concepts? And what we know is that the spectrum of duties that we're called to do, on one side of the spectrum, it is high-risk calls, things that we kind of traditionally think about cop work. And on the other end of the spectrum is completely social service stuff. It is caretaking of the community. And the majority of our calls lean more towards the caretaking piece of our police department. And if you go back in time and look how we recruit, we're recruiting for that high-risk officer, the one that wants to be a canine handler, a SWAT operator, or drive fast, or those sorts of things. And that's 5% or less of our job. Everything else, the other 95%, is what we do every single day. And our ideal officer is the officer that does those 95% very, very well, not that does the 5% very well.
And are you able to strategize your recruitment to get more folks who are good at that 95%?
Yes, absolutely. And we're getting better over time with it. It starts with the vision. And you can immediately tell the person that you're talking to where they're at on that spectrum and what type of officer they're going to be. When you tell a recruit that our vision is to create an environment where everybody matters, that is a different perspective. That is a different vision. That's a very unusual and unique vision and perspective. And that has opened up the scope of who we can recruit. We are now seeing people that are like, I never thought I could be a cop, never wanted to be a cop. But when I see all of that work you're doing, a lot of that stuff I can do, I want to do, I'm encouraged to do. And so we've been able to open up kind of that spectrum of who we're getting to apply and who we're getting to the academy.
When I did my ride along, there was a lot of interactions with unhoused folk. a lot of checking on people who maybe were sleeping, just checking, making sure that they were responsive. And I think that's what we're talking about here. And from some folk who have been in Anchorage for a long time and see the homelessness crisis as new and that not enough is being done, that there is a pressure, like I said earlier, of people saying, like, why aren't you arresting more people? So I guess, can you talk about where you think we are in terms of homelessness in Anchorage right now and what role the police are playing?
Sure. So the frustration level of the community is off the charts, and it's been building for quite some time. And so it's difficult sometimes for people to look at our recent past and look at what's happening in the future because they're frustrated. And what I can tell you about our recent past is we as a community, the media, our elected officials, people who live here, are much, much more aligned on how we interact, deal with the homeless population than we were 5 to 10 years ago. It was much more of a volatile community opinion about homelessness 5 years ago and 10 years ago than it is today. Collectively, I would say that your average everyday person believes that there are some challenges within the homeless community, substance abuse, mental health, that we all recognize we need to do something about. It's not about arresting them all. It's not about building a shelter that's big enough we can just put them all in there and then we solve the problem. That wasn't the case 5 or 10 years ago at all. And so that's encouraging that at least as a community, we're aligned. That doesn't mean that the frustration isn't there because the problem hasn't been solved. But to me, that's encouraging because it's easier for me to make operational decisions from a police department standpoint, knowing that in spite of the frustration, as a community, I know we're all pulling in the right direction. Currently, the municipality as a whole, as well as the police department, have so many things that are in play today that weren't in play 24 months ago. Crisis stabilization is coming online in the next year. Our nonprofits working with the police department and other municipal entities is better than it's ever been before. The options for treatment is higher than it's ever been before and still coming online. It's still increasing the beds, if you will, that are available for treatment. The working between different municipal entities, the police department, the fire department, the health department, is better than I've seen it in my 25 years, all pulling in the same direction, trying to accomplish the same thing. From a police department standpoint, you've never heard me as a chief, nor will you ever hear me say that homelessness is not a police problem. I've had those conversations in the past, but as chief, I haven't said that because although there's some truth to that, homelessness is not a police problem. There's some truth to that, but it is our problem. It's all of our problems that we adopted. And so creation of the HOPE team, where we have a homeless outreach prevention engagement team. We're looking to double up that team and create another one here in 2026. That team's sole responsibility is to care for and try to connect people on the street to services, to include housing, getting their ID so they can access to insurance, which they have access to, but they have a barrier. Some of those barriers are as simple as they don't have their ID because they don't have $35 to pay for it. We have our mobile intervention team, which is our clinicians, our master's level clinicians paired up with our officers. They're investing in those that are struggling with behavioral health, not exclusive to the homeless population, because behavioral health problems within Anchorage goes well beyond the homeless population. Our impact team that we just created, that team is made up of police officers as well as community service officers. Those are kind of your stereotypical community policing team within the police department. So these are all elements of the police department that spend a significant amount of time with the homeless population, but more broadly are on that social service side. And, you know, it's not the police department's job to house people, but the homeless outreach prevention engagement team, HOPE team, they've housed a lot of people over the last year. We're getting ready to launch downtown a navigation center, if you will, in combination with the Third Avenue Navigation Center and Beans that are already existing, where we have members of the HOPE team with some of our support agency or our nonprofit partners that are in the same location for longer periods of time. So it's not just a couple hours here and there. It's many, many hours throughout the week that now the police department can funnel those folks to this location where we continue to have police support and we continue to connect them to service. That is crazy idea. Police departments aren't doing that, but we play a role in this. It's a non-enforcement role. It's a non-policing role. It is a community caregiver role. It's because we care about this community. We have officers and clinicians that have devoted themselves to this. And, if we have those employees, we're going to take advantage of that level of care they want to give to their community. So I am so encouraged to where we're going right now because I can see things that didn't exist 2 years ago that are here, and they're growing and they're coming online, and that's going to make a pretty significant impact.
In the last 16 months, the firefighters in Anchorage have responded to more outdoor fires than structural fires, which is new. Like, that's a change, having this increase in responding to outdoor fires. And firefighters wish that there was more enforcement of the fire ordinance. It sounds to me like probably a lot of your officers, they didn't sign up to walk around the woods and give people tickets for small campfires. The firefighter's perspective is well, they got to learn that they can't do that now, so that when June, it's windy, it's dry, and they're still doing it, and then we get these bigger fires.
So we got our dashboard up, so you can go to the online dashboard that looks at both the camping ordinance as well as the fire ordinance that were passed in the last couple of months. If you go back, you can go back far enough in the dashboard where you see 0 or 1 arrests in a month time period. We're now up to 20, so you can see where we started to pick up kind of the level of enforcement. From kind of the onset, the idea was, when this got started, and this is based on conversations, both public testimony as well as concerns from the assembly members who were passing this legislation. And people have to remember, I pay very close attention to what happens and what words come out of the assembly members' mouth as they're passing these ordinances. So when we start enforcing the law, we're meeting the expectation when they pass these. And the expectation at the beginning was, we don't want this massive sweep through the woods of APD just arresting homeless people like crazy. And we also recognize that the police department has other calls they're going to. And fires are important. There's no doubt about it. But domestic violence and assaults, all these are important calls. So they had all of these things. And so when we first met with the fire department and said, hey, are we going to enforce these? From minute one, we were like, until we know what this looks like, how about AFD, when you respond to these fires, you let us know if you've got something that you really want enforcement on. They're going to have to kind of hold the scene a little bit for us, which is not typically their job. That's not what they do. And then we'll come and enforce. And that'll be the starting point. That'll give us kind of the lay of the land. Because if we had 100 calls to the police department a month to come out and enforce these, we just don't have the ability to do that from day one. And so you saw very little calls that we ended up going to. The fire department went, they dealt with them, they put them out, they moved on to the next.
And what they'd
call.
say is that a lot of times when they have these really big fires, everyone's scrammed. Those folks are gone. There's no one there. They're putting out a fire and it's an empty campsite.
Yep, completely. And so what we have done is we're slowly ratcheting up, trying to get officers to the scenes. Again, we can't take away from certain calls. That's why we've seen an increase in the number of arrests. And I think you're going to see those numbers continue to increase a little bit. They're probably not going to get as high as some people would like them to be, but they're going to continue to climb. We're going to get to a point where we just don't have staffing left to increase it to a certain amount. You're not going to see 50 a month. And it is important. The fire department is they painted a perfect picture. They show up, there's a fire, everyone's gone. There's nobody left. They put the fire out, they leave, they go to the next call for service. And so there's nothing left for us to do. Again, frustrating, particularly to the person that has a home or a business close by, but that's just the reality in some of the situations. So we'll see those arrests go up a little bit. It just, there's some limitations.
Did you always want to be chief?
Yes.
So you were pretty ambitious from the start.
Yes.
And what's that journey like? Like, what does somebody who wants to be chief do to become chief?
I think the first thing that's really, really important is you have to have a couple good mentors along the way. Very few people become chief that say, it was what I thought it was. It's like any other big job. You get in there and you're like, this isn't exactly what I thought it was. There's a whole lot of stuff I wasn't really prepared for. And so I would recommend that you have a good couple mentors. I've had 2 priceless mentors in my career that I still talk to on a regular basis, almost weekly, that have kind of prepared me along the way. 20 years of my career has been active steps to kind of get where I got, the education, the master's degree that I have. And you have to think very broadly. As officers, we get really honed in on the day-to-day job. And if you want to be the chief, you really got to back up and look at the big picture and the impact. My clients, if you will, are not just my employees. In fact, the public is really more of who I work for and who I interact with, who I answer questions from, who I respond to, more so than my employees as chief, because I got 600 employees, I got 300,000 customers, and then I got the media and I got the politicians. And so you got to understand that very broad perspective.
So what Chief Strachey talked about, he also always wanted to be chief. And what he talked about learning the hard way was that the chief is the political appointee. And he had a difficult situation where a subordinate got appointed chief above him because that subordinate had created a close relationship with the person who became mayor. And he had to learn about greasing the wheels and creating relationships with politicians. That is not something that he thought about. And I'm just curious about, did you have a similar experience?
No, I kind of have a little bit of a different perspective. And I will say that, one of my mentors just told me from day one, do not become chief until you're ready to give up your job any day. And part of that message that he always gives to me, and to this day, when I talk to him, he reminds me of that. He says, you got to be true to who you are and what you believe. And there is the right mayor that comes along. There's the right working relationship between the mayor and the assembly and the police department that comes along that is the right fit for me. And I don't want to try to fit myself into an environment that's not going to work for me. There's a period of time where I was looking for chief jobs outside of Alaska. And while I was going through those...
Because you thought you'd be passed over? You just didn't think it was going to happen here?
Once you get to 20 years, you start thinking, how much longer do I want to stick around before I just want to retire, collect my retirement, and go work someplace else? And so you just start evaluating that. So I was looking for jobs outside. And part of that process, I would talk to mayors or city managers in interviews, and I'd look at them and say, hey, this is as much an interview for me as it is for you. I'm not desperate for this job, and I'm not going to work a job that I'm miserable because we are not mostly aligned on what's happening. And so for me, my conversations, particularly with politicians, since we're talking about the political aspect of it, is to use those words of, do I grease the wheels? I generally speak the same with all the politicians. Now, I may, modify the language just a little bit because I understand who I'm communicating with, but at the end of the day, I'm not going to change my opinion or what I'm telling you versus a different politician. You're going to get what you get. Now, I'm certainly going to listen to you, and I'm certainly going to take your opinions and your advisement, but I'm not going to change who I am so I personally can have a better outcome.
Well, I'll ask one specific question about this. So Chief McCoy resigned. Chief Curl came in. Chief Curl retired. Very close to a new mayor coming in. Chief Cross was appointed. I mean, there was a lot of turnover in the 3 years leading up to you becoming the chief. Were you involved in that turmoil? Were you trying to put your name forward at that time? And was there any frustration about that series of chiefs where you weren't one of them?
I definitely would have taken the chief position during that period of time, but I wasn't going to get it. So yeah, I was involved. I was a deputy chief under Mike Curl while he was the chief. I was a captain under Chief Dahl as well as Chief McCoy when they were chiefs. So I was in the mix. I was around. I've worked directly for every mayor that we've had, dating all the way back to Mark Begich. So I've been in and around that environment for my entire career. There's just certain opportunities you're going to have and certain opportunities you're not going to have. And I was fairly comfortable under the last administration. I was not going to have the opportunity. I would have taken it because, there's a specific way I want the police department to function. I have a way I think policing should be done. And I would have taken advantage of that opportunity, but I'm not going to change the way I think policing is going to be done because of who the boss is. And that's why it wasn't going to afford me the opportunity. I wasn't the person for that time.
Are there any big misconceptions that the public has about APD right now that you want to set straight?
I think the biggest misconception that some members of the public, not everyone, is just the level of care and consideration that these officers have. Just yesterday, someone came up to me and said, even calls that are relatively insignificant, there's an alarm at a business, and in the middle of the night, officers go to check the alarm. To the officers, like, this is not a big deal. Officers probably don't even remember this call. So you do the thing. This business happened to have cameras on the outside. Officers are just looking, flashlight, because it's an internal alarm. And then at the end of the call, one of the officers looks up at one of the cameras and says, hey, we checked everything. Everything looks good. Don't see anything on the inside. If something happens in the morning and you need us, like, call us back. Like, talking to the camera.
Yeah.
Like, providing information to that business owner. Like, that's just a very simple example of the level of time and care that our officers take. And do officers make mistakes? Are there times that they take shortcuts? Sure, those things happen. But by and large, these officers are so committed to the community and so committed to what we refer to as closing the loop. You know, I'm lucky. I'm lucky that we have the type of employees and the amount of care that they give in their job. I'm lucky to be a chief in a department like this with these type of employees.
Chief Sean Case, thanks so much for being on the show today.
You bet. Absolutely.
Thank you, listeners. If you like what you heard, please subscribe, rate, and review us. To contact me, email rep.andrew.gray@ahlec.gov or call 907-269-0123.